On.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Hudson Institute. My name is Harold Roth. I will be your host today. We are very pleased to have with us Ed Parkinson, the CEO of FirstNet. Okay, is this better? Okay, microphone's on? All right. We're very pleased to have with us today Ed Parkinson, the CEO of FirstNet. Before speaking with Mr. Parkinson, I would ask everyone to join me in taking out your cell phone and turning off the buzzer so we don't get interrupted. Mr. Parkinson has over a decade of experience in politics and public safety communications. He serves as the acting CEO for non-executive functions and executive director for external affairs for First Responder Network Authority, or FirstNet. In an earlier role at FirstNet, he was the executive director for government affairs and responsible for developing a 50-state political strategy which incorporated all congressional members, governors, state legislatures, tribal governments, and local elected officials. This strategy involved the recruitment and management of a highly skilled team and the execution of a year-long national strategy that resulted in every state and territory opting into FirstNet. Prior to joining FirstNet, Mr. Parkinson was a professional staff member with the U.S. House Homeland Security Committee. Welcome to Hudson.
Thanks, Harold. Appreciate that. It's good to be here.
If we look back to 9/11, one of the things that was immediately obvious was the complete inadequacy of communications for public safety and first responders. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened after that and the development of FirstNet?
Yeah, I mean, the key thing that public safety told Congress over the years and the lead up to the passage of the FirstNet legislation was the fact that you had a variety of different communications tools, land mobile radios, the advent of broadband technologies, and really what they needed was a single system. They needed a single system that worked 24/7, 365. And this is where FirstNet really was born. Public safety, a lot of the major associations across the nation lobbied Congress and then really were the instigators for the creation of the passage of the FirstNet legislation in February of 2012. And really the auspices of what they were trying to do was to do just that, create this single nationwide public safety broadband network that was dedicated to first responders, something that up to that point had never taken place before.
And tell us about FirstNet. Where are you housed, and what does the organizational structure look like?
Yeah, so we, as I said, back in 2012 we were created. We're an independent entity within NTIA, which is inside the Department of Commerce. And so we have a 15-person board, similar to a private sector structure, yet we are a government agency. And we have the responsibility for the deployment, for overseeing the contract of this system. When we looked at how FirstNet could go out and achieve the goals of trying to deploy the system, we were thinking primarily in the region of risk. How could we mitigate risk as best we can so that we could provide the solution in the most efficient and effective manner for public safety? And so rather than going through a traditional statement of work procurement process, we went out with a statement of objectives, whereby we focused on 16 core areas, looking at coverage, the core network, device ecosystem, application ecosystem, cybersecurity. And we went out to the marketplace and asked the market to provide us solutions. So after a fairly vigorous procurement process, AT&T was selected through that. And that procurement process took about 18 months. And so again, pretty rigorous, multiple vendors who bid. And that then instigated the process of deploying the system. And right now we're at about just over 1 million connections within the FirstNet system, a little over 10,000 agencies. We're in every state and territory. The network's about 75% deployed. The FCC has designated about 734 markets, and we're up and running in over 650 of those. Well over 160 devices that appear on our device ecosystem, and well over 100 applications. And so we've got a fleet of deployables that public safety, if they are FirstNet subscribers, can use free of charge. And so it's this entire fleet of ecosystem solutions that we wanted to bring to bear for public safety. And all of that began with how we were thinking about the procurement, how we could think differently, since the scale of this network is unlike anything we've ever seen before, and the complexities were just as complicated. So trying to mitigate all of that risk while at the same time provide a solution that public safety knew that they could trust and rely on, that was a difficult balance, but one that we feel fairly good about today.
What is the government's role in this? Why do we need the federal government here?
Well, I think it was clear even at the beginning when, if you go back a number of years in the wake of 9/11, things like priority and preemption, the carriers just weren't going to offer that. It just wasn't happening. And the model of deploying a network in this scale and complexity, no one was doing it. And this is the unique aspect of why we needed government to step in and develop that public-private partnership model that would allow for the ecosystem to begin. And it couldn't be done any other way. We tried, and I think the FCC auction in '73, the historians out there can keep me honest on this one, but there was a piece in that auction where the D block spectrum, to which we now hold the license, they were looking to try and provide priority and preemptive services on that. And no one bid on that spectrum back in 2009, 2008. I'm not 100% right on those dates. So it was tried before. And this is where the unique aspect of the public-private partnership came in, by having we control the license to the spectrum, by bringing the cash up front that Congress allocated to FirstNet, seeding the market in that way, and then creating a competitive procurement process. All of those were a strategic balance in being able to show that, having that strategic public-private partnership between the government and and the private sector would allow for first responders to gain access to this type of solution, one that they've been asking for many, many years.
Tell us about the spectrum holdings of FirstNet.
Sure. So we hold the license to 20 megahertz in band 14. It's in the 700 band. If you're not a spectrum guru, it's really beachfront property in terms of spectrum. Its propagations are fantastic. It's really a fantastic piece of swath of spectrum to hold, and it's nationwide. So it's not just an individual licenses. We have the full license over all 56 states, territories, and the District of Columbia. As part of the contract with AT&T, we are leasing that spectrum to AT&T, and they in turn pay us for access to that spectrum. But then, as part of the solution that AT&T brought forward, they are offering what's called an all-band solution. So they have FirstNet has access to all of AT&T's LTE spectrum, full priority and preemption over the entire suite of spectrum. So it's not just the band 14 that we have, although that is purely dedicated to public safety. AT&T can lease that if they have excess network capacity and for commercial use. But we have full priority and preemptive services over the entire AT&T spectrum holding. So it's a tremendously large pipe on band 14 that's now exponentially bigger, which is pretty exciting.
So if there are public safety entities that are converging to work together on an emergency, if there's a fire or a major accident, and you have public safety first responders from different jurisdictions, but they're all on FirstNet, then everything's interoperable? Is that
Very much so. Well, networks today are interoperable. In the commercial network, I don't know what your personal cell phone carrier is, but if it's Verizon or Sprint or T-Mobile or AT&T, all these networks are interoperable today. And so interoperability isn't really the issue. The issue, I think, is making sure that the coordination takes place prior to. And so mutual aid agreements, which public safety are very good at. The pre-planning, which again, public safety are really at the forefront of how to do that. All of that takes place seamlessly. And so network interoperability just isn't an issue, since all networks can speak to each other. The pre-planning is key. And making sure folks understand. And ideally, we would obviously want public safety to use FirstNet. It is their network after all. No other system that's out there in the United States today has the suite of capabilities that FirstNet can offer. with the dedicated core, the dedicated spectrum, the device ecosystem, the application ecosystem, and others. It's an all-encompassing solution, and one that is, in my opinion, certainly unmatched.
And is FirstNet built out to rural areas?
It's a key component of the solution. And so in the legislation that created FirstNet, there are called rural milestones. And so we interpreted that as about 15% of any phase of any deployment would have to include rural deployment. And we defined rural using the Rural Electrification Act, which I think is about a population base of about 20,000 or less is deemed as rural. And so that's a huge part of the United States. And so we have really made rural deployments a fundamental aspect of what we're trying to achieve. And that's, again, the beauty of the FirstNet system. Because FirstNet is being built out by AT&T, any aspect of the FirstNet system that is being deployed in new areas of rural community, AT&T can offer commercial services on that network if public safety is not using band 14, for example. And so as a byproduct of the FirstNet service, we're now seeing commercial services being built out in rural parts of the country in areas that otherwise, frankly, probably would not have been touched. And that's a direct result of the FirstNet priority of offering service to public safety in communities all across the country. And another part of that too, Harold, is the deployable solution that we can provide. You know, as part of the contract with AT&T, we have 72 deployables that can be rolled out anywhere in the country. We have a timeline by which they have to be upon being called out, they have to be up and running. And they're being used in very rural parts of the country, as well as some urban areas. But a good example is in the Sturgis Motor Rally out in Sturgis, South Dakota, a very rural part of the state. Tens of thousands of bikers descend on that town for a festival for 3 or 4 days. And so South Dakota Public Safety requested our deployables to be pulled out there, and they were up and running. And again, that's the flexibility that the system can provide. If you need to have surge capabilities, we can offer that extra capacity using deployable systems and we have tethered drones as part of the network now. We also have a blimp that's part of the system. It can be tethered up to 1,000 feet. It can be up for 2 weeks. And again, provides a much greater area of coverage than 60-foot masts on a deployable. But it's one that, again, provides a new type of solutions. And this is, again, the power of the public-private partnership. The market is there, and public safety is this never-ending customer. There's always new areas where public safety will need service and will need a voice. And this is the type of thinking that we have at FirstNet to provide those new solutions. How can we improve the network? How can we upgrade the network? And how can we respond to future challenges?
I assume public safety has unique security concerns. They certainly don't want bad guys being able to listen in on their plans or their deployments. Tell us a bit about security on the FirstNet network.
Yeah, again, this was one of the key objectives that we put out there in the procurement. Again, just coming back to the RFP back in 2014-15, we had those 16 core objectives. Cybersecurity was one of them. And if you think about it, really, FirstNet is the first network that's out there that had cybersecurity built in from day one. Cybersecurity was always an add-on after the fact as generations of telecommunications evolved. But for FirstNet, it's been there from day one. And J10 in our RFP was that cybersecurity section. We had multiple public comment periods where we had a lot of folks offering, well, what kind of solutions would you need to require? What kind of threats do you have to mitigate against? We have a dedicated team of cybersecurity experts who were brought on board during that phase. And also, as part of the solution with AT&T, we have access, and FirstNet is part of their Global Network Operations Center. It's this 24/7, 365 center that monitors the global AT&T network, and FirstNet is a key component of that system. So cybersecurity is especially too when you think about the advent of 5G and the way that networks are moving. Cybersecurity is going to be at the forefront of what we do at FirstNet, and it's something that too, just like the technology from 4G to 5G, just like how devices, all of us here today are listening on the phone. You think about flip phones back in the day. We all had them, right? Think about how you use your cell phone 10 years ago versus how you use it today. Cybersecurity is the same thing. It's going to evolve. Threats change, threats evolve, and we have to be able to be ahead of that and to be able to respond in a strategic way.
There's a lot of concern in Washington today about network security and particularly certain foreign manufacturers of network equipment. Is that a concern for FirstNet, or you've avoided those manufacturers today?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, American networks don't use Chinese equipment in particular, but that's something that's been well published, well resorted, and FirstNet's the same. It's something that we saw coming down the line, and we really try to work very closely with the partner to make sure that the network was using specific technology, specific hardware, and trusted sources. Supply chain security is obviously fundamental, and the FirstNet system is the same. We've got to make sure that network integrity is of paramount importance, and it's one that AT&T takes very seriously. And FirstNet, as the authority that oversees the contract and ensures that everything from the coverage is verified to making sure that this public service that we're providing is of the highest quality, cybersecurity, and making sure that the network is secure is another key component of our oversight responsibilities.
Do local municipalities and first responders have different security requirements, or are you finding that there's roughly a similar type of security requirement across the country?
The balance that we had to strike when we were thinking about the procurement was, well, how would we build the system? Would we do it on a local basis? Would we do it on a state-by-state basis? Or would we look at it from a national perspective? And if you looked at it from all of those different, the most efficient way in terms of speed to market, deployment, as well as signing up users, was going with the nationwide model. The same is said for cybersecurity. So when we look at the nationwide model from cyber, that is how we approach it. We look at it holistically. Rather than individual aspects, we had to look at it from that aspect. So J10 in our RFP really focuses on the national scope of how we protect this from end to end, with end-to-end encryption, making sure that, as I said, trusted sources are being leveraged in the system. And so we've gone nationwide. And it's really AT&T's responsibility to push that and make sure that that is being done. And it's our responsibility to make sure that they are doing what they said they would do. And we're very comfortable with where things stand right now.
Public safety entities have a choice today.
Sure.
They can come to FirstNet, or they can go to other providers of communication services. Tell us a bit about the marketplace for communication services to
Yeah, I
first
think
responders.
we're in this amazing phase right now where we have finally true competition in the marketplace. If you think about all of us in our personal capacities, we can go into a store and we can look at different offers that are out there. Public safety didn't have that choice for many, many years. And so now you have an incumbent who is looking to hold on to their marketplace, and FirstNet is now really making great strides at being able to provide new solutions with better customer service, a much more competitive price point, added features like quality of service, priority and preemption, the dedicated core that we have, the fleet of deployables. And these are things that no one else has. So you're seeing true competition. And in my opinion, I think that's a tremendously advantageous thing for the end user, public safety. You've seen price points for monthly plans really come down. You've seen customer service really improve. You've seen the way that all carriers are approaching this as taking this public safety marketplace very, very seriously. And a reflection of that is, I think you've seen companies advertise about how they service public safety, from Super Bowls to college football, and that's really exciting to see that FirstNet now is changing the way that carriers look at public safety. They see it now as a key component of any solution that they provide in a suite of products and services. But this is a tangible market with real dollars behind it. And more importantly, it's a market that is protecting the rest of us here in the United States. So from the US perspective, we see it as a really, really competitive marketplace, and one that we're very excited to see really grow to the benefit of public safety.
Tell us about how priority and preemption works for public safety. If there's an emergency, how does that all get coordinated?
Yeah, the beautiful thing about the solution that we've been able to provide is the technologies of priority and preemption are embedded inside the system, inside the network. And so it's not as though you have to push any buttons to make it happen. It's just there. It's all embedded in the codes that public safety identify themselves, are identified by networks. And so having that embedded in the solution provides a seamless user experience for folks who are leveraging FirstNet. A good example is just the 4th of July parades that we had down here in Washington, D.C. Folks leveraging the FirstNet network, and also, by the way, when the Nationals won the World Series in the World Series parade, FirstNet system was working seamlessly across it. Same can't be said for other services. And having that priority and preemptive capabilities to ensure that the public safety traffic is always at the forefront, is never being appended, is a key component of the solution that we have. And so having that embedded in the technology of LTE as well as the networks, and making sure that it doesn't impact any user group, nor does it diminish the user experience of how we achieve things at FirstNet, is certainly something that public safety wanted. They wanted to have a seamless experience, and that's something that they get through FirstNet.
Yeah, emergencies happen not just in the United States, but around the world. Sure. What are other countries doing in terms of communications for their first responders?
Yeah, it's really fascinating when we think of the impact that FirstNet's had, not just here in the United States, but globally. The UK has their Emergency Services Network, ESN. South Korea has SafeNet, which is their FirstNet type solution. And then we have ourselves, and I'd say we're sort of the three countries right now that are at the forefront. With no disrespect to my South Korean friends, they were very much at the lead, but we've been able to leapfrog them, which is really exciting to see the progress that we've made. Other nations are really placing a big emphasis on this marketplace. Just in August last year, we hosted 19 countries at our lab for a 3-day conference where we had representatives from Japan, Australia, New Zealand, the Canadians, many European nations, and all of them are looking to deploy systems. And we've seen amazing use cases of applications being leveraged. A good example, in New Zealand, the folks down there, they've been able to develop an app which has helped with just paperwork, right? So rather than, if you get pulled over for speeding, rather than having to write everything out on paper, just take a snapshot of your driver's license, all the information gets automatically populated and sent back over broadband to the center. You're done in 5 minutes, as opposed to having to go back to the squad car, write it all up, go back, write it out, and that saved a huge amount of time. The New Zealanders told us it saved them about $4 million just in active user time for their officers. So just that one example in a market much smaller than what we have in the United States is something that we can leverage. And what we're trying to do at FirstNet is to be at the forefront of this global marketplace, because that will benefit public safety here in the United States. The more that we can grow this global marketplace of public safety broadband, that'll only have a benefit when you think of the device ecosystem solutions that we can provide, when you think of applications that are being leveraged by the New Zealand example that I was talking about. Japan, for example, around their Olympic Village, they're looking to develop their own public safety system around there. And so we can learn from each other and definitely try and avoid the mistakes that other nations have made. And we haven't batted 1,000. I don't think anyone does. And so we want to try and share those with our friends and supporters around the world, so that, again, ultimately will benefit the end user here in the United States, and we can take advantage of that global marketplace.
Was public safety an issue at the recent World Radio Conference?
We actually do a lot of work in standards development. So while it wasn't primarily one of the main topics, 3GPP is the 3GPP. It's a global standards body on which FirstNet sits. And global standards is a key component of any system, and one that we're at the forefront of. In fact, in our legislation, it specifically calls out the role that FirstNet must play in public safety standards throughout the world. And we've seen a huge impact on that. We just had release 17 with 3GPP, which really is touching on 5G, and it's starting to look at a lot of the elements of what that could look like for first responders. And because of the efforts of FirstNet, and I think there were 8 other countries who was looking at the solutions there at 3GPP and Release 17, we've seen a big emphasis on the impact of what public safety networks will look like as a result of the standard body's work that we've done. So it's a really, really good start. In fact, on our firstnet.gov blog, we just had our standards team just wrote a good piece on what they experienced at the last standards body at Release 17. So it's at the forefront of what we do. You know, we have a team that goes to all of these events around the world and represents public safety here to ensure that those type of events and those type of standards are embedded in the FirstNet system, and other networks, other systems can take advantage of that.
There's a lot of discussion about standard setting around the administration, how does that get coordinated, or is public safety so uniquely just a FirstNet issue that you don't have to do as much coordination with the other parts of the administration?
We really do try and coordinate as best we can. The piece of that, though, is it's such a unique aspect. And when you think, too, about the scale of a commercial network, and for many, many years, public safety had either been non-existent nor just an afterthought, we're really just at the forefront, just at the beginning phases of what this will look like from a standards body globally. And so, working very closely with NTIA, obviously, is a key component of what we do. Their international vision takes the lead, we follow. And our standards bodies works very, very closely with as I said before, partners around the country, in other countries. And so ensuring that we follow the line of what we know will benefit public safety from a standards perspective is something that we're really at the forefront of.
You were telling me earlier about coordination with Canada and how they're looking at public safety communications. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, we're really optimistic that 2020 could be the year where our Canadian friends are able to deploy us, or at least get an RFP going. They have allocated already the same Band 14 spectrum in Canada that matches perfectly with the Band 14 spectrum we have at FirstNet. And so the team up there, Lawrence Chow is the gentleman who runs the show over there, and his team, as well as others, Joe Fournier and so on. We have a very, very close working relationship with the Canadians. We have had for many years. And we're cautiously optimistic that 2020 will be the time when they're able to hopefully get some sort of RFP going. They've done a series of white papers up there, and they've really done a hell of a lot of good homework. And with luck, this is the year that they'll get moving. And imagine where you can have seamless communications between the Detroit PD and Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Windsor, and cross-border communications in a way that provides for seamless solutions. And I think that's something that both us and the Canadians certainly look forward to. And we, as I say, they were at our conference in August, and we have a tremendous working relationship with them, and it's really the model we hope for others going forward.
With lower prices and greater technological capabilities, public safety must be doing a lot of new things with FirstNet. Can you tell us a bit about some of the new things that you're seeing being developed by public safety entities?
Yeah, the great thing about any network is once you put it in the hands of the end user, that's when it really starts to sync. Think about how we all use our own personal devices now versus how we did 10 years ago. It's completely different. So for us, we've seen, frankly, really, really strong growth in application development. We have an application developer program, and so anyone who's can apply, become a trusted entity in that, and then develop apps for FirstNet system. We've seen tremendous use and partners with, frankly, before I get to the end user piece, with other government entities. This is a big one. The Public Safety Communications Research Lab in NIST out in Boulder, Colorado, as part of the same legislation that created FirstNet, they were allocated $300 million for research into improving public safety comms. And so the PSCR team have done a yeoman's job in attracting new entrants to the public safety broadband solution through prizes and challenges and so on. And Derek Orr and his team over there deserve a hell of a lot of credit because they have really been at the forefront of pushing this. A great example is one organization developed a haptics tool for firefighters. And so what this solution did was it would, on a firefighter's helmet, if you couldn't see, if you've been to a fire academy, they fill a smoke-filled room, you can't even see your hand in front of you, it's so dark. But the helmet would buzz if they needed to turn right, or buzz on the left if they needed to turn left, or at the top if they needed to get down. And so those haptics solutions were one that was fascinating to see come out. And so that partnership, I think, between one government entity, FirstNet, and PSCR is just one type of solution where we hope to grow. I mean, there's a number of broadband solutions out there, broadband grants. USDA has $600 million in broadband grants that we'd love to coordinate with. Justice has a tremendous number of programs that we too would like to work with. And so NTIA has been at the forefront of collecting a resource of what those look like so that we know we don't invest where others are. We don't want to duplicate monies, right? We want to coordinate and do that. So the NTIA team deserve a lot of credit on that front. But the end user, to come back to the sentiment of your question, has been, it's nothing like seeing it put in the hands of the end user. And so we've seen certain devices from vendors being used to attach speaker nodes on so they can use it for push-to-talk solutions, and in very rural parts of the country, as well as urban. So we've been seeing routers and Cradlepoint systems being used as integrated into 911 systems, so that you have some sort of 911 solution on that front. So it's all having the FirstNet system as a backbone. So it's amazing when you see a community like public safety, who don't often have all that much to work with, use their own ingenuity when they see a technical solution at their fingertips. And there are some states, Indiana, for example, has been pushing way ahead in terms of the type of solutions that they have out there. So it's really exciting to see the evolution of the use of the system in ways, frankly, that maybe we didn't expect them 2 or 3 years ago.
Is the FirstNet system more survivable than other systems?
Hardening is a huge part of what we are all about. Redundancy is key, and again, there's a lot of questions that have been asked in the past about, well, are you going to make the network 4 nines or 5 nines hardened? Well, for every dollar you spend on hardening, you lose that for coverage, and so there's a balance one has to make. And as we think about hardening, as we think about resiliency, that's a key component. We have a finite number of dollars, and so we have to think about how do we do that. There are certain areas where we have to build the system so that it can withstand minus 50 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. There are some where it has to be able to mitigate a hurricane. And so there are local solutions for local issues. That's, again, what we have to think about at FirstNet. Resiliency is key, hardening is key. It's one that we'll always be able to improve upon as we continue to build out, expand, and upgrade the system.
What are your plans going forward?
We've had a really successful 2019, and so in 2020, we're focusing on 3 main areas. The first is continuing to engage with public safety. I mean, this is public safety's network. We won't be able to make strategic investments in the network without public safety's involvement. And so we have a team that's dedicated to engaging with public safety to ensure that they provide direct feedback into this authority to make sure that we can make strategic investments in the line. That leads into our second aspect, which is developing out and improving and upgrading our roadmap. It's on firstnet.gov. It's gotten a lot of feedback and was developed in coordination with public safety. And so it focuses on 6 core domains that is going to be the blueprint, if you will, for where we're going to make our third focus, which is our strategic investments back in the system. I mentioned earlier that AT&T is paying us for leasing the spectrum, the band 14 spectrum that we have. Well, the revenue that's generated by the network by law has to be reinvested back into the network. And so we have to take into account public safety's needs, what their local challenges are. We have to think about what business plans we can make that are strategic to the overall benefit of the network. And then we have to make those strategic investments. And we kickstarted that process back in September with our first 2 investments, which were expanding our deployable fleet, but also getting ready for 5G, making strategic investments towards 5G, so that we're fast followers in the 5G program and that FirstNet will be 5G ready. So making more strategic investments in 2020 is going to be a key part of that.
I could keep asking you questions all day, but I should let the audience have a chance to ask you some questions. So please raise your hand and identify yourself, and someone will be by with a microphone for you. So this gentleman here.
Hi, Chris McRae. I'm a little bit confused because 2 months ago, Hudson Institute hosted an event on 5G, and it made it sound as if 5G is so different in terms of data collection. It's now more thing-based than people-based. The quantity of data where you get subscriptions from seems to be so completely different that I got the view from that event that you can't really go from 4G to 5G, that the carriers of 4G are not going to be the main leaders of 5G. So I was wondering really, what does a system look like maybe in Nordica or somewhere which is maybe ahead or at least near the front of 5G in a way that Americans would like 5G to lead?
Yeah, Chris, the thing about 5G is it's going to be built on 4G LTE, and that's the balance that one has to strike. So when you think about 1G to 2G to 3G, they were very much generational breaks that one makes. You can't go, there was never any bleed over between the two. This is different in 4G to 5G. And that's just it's going to take a mindset shift in how folks approach the 5G type solution. And so you're going to see the baseline of 4G being really the foundation upon which 5G is going to be built upon. And that's going to take time. You're going to see multiple iterations of, if you will, a process through which folks will invest in 5G. For example, the standard that folks use that carriers are using in core technologies and upgrading is the first step of that is going to 3x core. There are multiple steps after that as you think about pushing a core out to the edge and what that looks like in a 5G type environment. So to think of a 5G network as being a clean break from 4G isn't accurate. You've got to see that as a sort of natural evolution that takes time. And there will be cross-pollination between the two generations for a period before you get to proper 5G. We at FirstNet, when we're thinking about 5G, we're looking at it from a fast follower perspective. You heard me say that before. We're letting the commercial networks go out there at the forefront and see what they can provide, see what solutions they have out there. Public safety, my customer, if you will, they can't afford to take the risk of something not working, right? They have to be able to rely on their system with their lives. And so you don't want to be first, but you want to be a pretty close second. And that's the sort of the attitude we have at FirstNet when we're thinking about 5G. It's still very early, right? We haven't really kickstarted that. A lot of these networks that are out there with 5G type services are still that sort of late 4G evolution type system that they have out there. It's still going to be some time before true 5G is out there. And then we at FirstNet, we're watching that very closely. We're making sure that we don't get too far ahead of ourselves, but we want to be that sort of fast follower so that public safety know that they can trust the system with their lives.
Gentleman here. Please wait for the microphone and identify yourself.
Henry Hedger, retired government. You mentioned New Zealand, the police force, and photographing a license and sending it forward, I presume with a code or a description of the offense or whatever is the problem. Does this vary very much from nation to nation or even the municipality here from one? Have we adopted this? And I wondered about the Black Star license, which will be required for aviation starting September 2020. Do they have the equivalent of Black Star licenses now? Are they getting into that overseas? Is this sort of an international operation? What do you know about all this?
So I don't know much about that. I can't comment on that. I don't have any knowledge on the Black Star Alliance piece, so I can't comment on that, unfortunately. Just coming back to your example regarding New Zealand, you know, the work that we're trying to do at FirstNet is to coordinate with our friends and allies around the world to make sure that this public safety broadband marketplace that we're developing here in the United States is one that benefits public safety here in the United States. You know, we have, as I mentioned before, this forum that we hosted last August. There's a lot of countries out there who are really thinking about public safety in a way that they've not been able to think about before. And having a forum where we can share ideas, we can share experiences, we can show people, you know, this is what's worked, this didn't work. The New Zealand application example is something for them that we thought, wow, that could be something that a lot of folks over here would frankly find pretty interesting. So for me, it's about the sharing of ideas and having an open channel of communication with these groups. So it's really that, making sure that we are you know, being good actors, but at the forefront of what this public safety marketplace is. And the United States has a responsibility, in my opinion, to lead and to make sure that we are showing that we're at the cutting edge of anything that happens in telecommunications. And so with public safety broadband, our micro piece of this, we feel the same way. And we're lucky in that we have very, very strong partnerships with other nations around the world with a collective sense of doing what's right for public safety, which is providing the best type of solution every day that we possibly can for the men and women who keep us safe.
Thank you. My name is Natasha, just not a citizen, I suppose. I was curious. Has California and more recently Australia provided perhaps potential lessons as far as when you can see on the ground that the destruction of infrastructure, how would that help you develop products that are more flexible and agile and mobile?
It's a terrific question. So the California one first, then I'll get to Australia. So the California wildfires season, year and a half ago, especially the disaster that took place in Paradise, California, where 83 people lost their lives. It's the most deadly wildfire that took place in the United States. Bear in mind that the fires there were going at a football field a second. That's how fast they were moving. I mean, unbelievable. We were there after the fact, and so public safety was able to deploy. FirstNet was deployed to provide communication solutions in Paradise afterwards. And I went and visited Paradise a number of months after the fire, and there was still, a couple of months later, a FirstNet deployable in Paradise, providing communication services to public safety. It's amazing just what we're seeing in terms of wildfires here in the United States, and then your other example, Australia. I spoke to one of my Australian counterparts not that long ago, and they're based in Canberra, which, as you maybe know, has really been affected heavily by the wildfires there in Melbourne in particular. And it's just on a scale over there that we just can't really imagine. It's just unfathomable. Yet we're hoping that a number of months, hopefully when these fires stop, God willing, that they will be able to develop lessons learned on how they've been able to leverage public safety communications. Good example is drone technology. And so are they able to fly drones over a particular area to ensure that, or to look at the mapping of how this works? Private companies have provided potential solutions in that regard. Certainly in Paradise, one vendor did that to show, well, what the town looked like before, what did it look like after. It was unbelievable. In Paradise, I was going through there with a local, and he was getting lost because he couldn't recognize the neighborhood anymore. He didn't know, well, was this, Main Street or was that over there? Because everything, it looked just like something out of a war zone. And so to be able to provide those type of solutions on the front end to prevent death and to protect law enforcement, firefighters, ambulance services, to ensure that communities are safer, and then afterwards for recovery efforts, as we have emergency managers on one of our primary user groups on FirstNet, all of that needs to be incorporated in public safety broadband. And this is where a strong working relationship, not only between governments, but also with the private sector, so the private sector can provide solutions in a way that maybe they wouldn't understand that this is something that they could have an impact on, but also making sure that they understand that this is a tangible marketplace and one that they can generate revenue while at the same time having a dramatic impact on keeping America safer. That's part of the solution we're trying to provide at FirstNet, and that's the kind of conversation we're trying to really develop and grow throughout the United States and globally, using your example.
Gentleman here.
Thank you. My name is Minky, and I'm intern of New America. And I think FirstNet might generate tremendous amount of data, both in public safety and both in commercial market. So who will be the main governor of the tremendous data that FirstNet generates?
So the FirstNet side of the house, we don't touch any data. All that's on the AT&T side of the house. And you've seen carriers talk about how they control or not control data. That's really where that goes. But FirstNet, the authority, we have no access to any of that data. We don't touch it. We specifically designed our procurement in that way so that we wouldn't be involved in any of those type of conversations. So we stay far away from any of those things, and all of that's more on the carrier side of the house.
You were telling me about a great example, a recent hurricane and survivability. Share that with our audience.
So in 2017, when Hurricane Florence came through up the East Coast, the folks out in North Carolina, one small town out there, really was able to leverage FirstNet in a way that we hadn't seen before. Hal Loader, who's the emergency manager for one of the towns just on the coast there, he was able to talk about how FirstNet was up and running and being leveraged by public safety in ways that they'd never seen before. LMR systems went down, commercial networks went down, and the only thing that was up and running was FirstNet. We had our deployables there, the hardening of the sites were able to have an impact, and using push-to-talk solutions, applications over the broadband network allowed him to communicate, allowed him to be able to move the resources of the town around in a way that otherwise he wouldn't have been able to have done. And so it's fascinating when you think about, when you see the example of Paradise that I used, the Sturgis Murder Rally. You have the 4th of July example. You have planned events, you have pre-planned events, you have unexpected events. Hurricane Michael with Panama, Florida, that was a huge disaster that just tore through that city. And FirstNet was up and running. We were up and running before, during, and after. And it was a really, really tremendous thing to be able to see that on the ground, and folks, sign up for FirstNet there because they say, no, this is something that they can really rely on. So lots of different examples of how this works. And one that I'm sure there are parents in the room and parents around, this is something that out of Palm Beach School District, they've retrofitted all of their school buses with FirstNet devices. And they believe that they've been able to prevent 1 or 2 school shootings as a result of being able to communicate with each other in a way that they hadn't been able to do beforehand. And if you think about that, you think about the impact that public safety broadband, FirstNet in particular, is having in emergencies around various verticals, education, healthcare, when you think of hospitals and how EMS is leveraging this, when you think about transportation and being able to move traffic in a way or push ambulances and fire engines through traffic strategically using mapping tools and so on, predictive mapping and whatnot, over broadband, secure, reliable broadband technologies. When you think about a smart city, public safety is a key component of that. Utilities are extended primary users of the FirstNet system. So you're starting to build this holistic vision of what public safety broadband really is. And this is how it's being used today. It's going to be really exciting and interesting to see how it's going to be used in the future.
And with that, please join me in thanking Mr. Park. Oh, what? Another question here.
Yeah.
Last question.
Oh, yes. My name is Margaret Chan, just representing myself. FirstNet resides with Department of Commerce?
That's
is that
correct.
correct? Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask if you could speak to how, it being in commerce, how much it's been adapted by the other federal agencies.
Great question.
How has it, to what extent has it replaced what they've had, or does it just enhance what they've been using before FirstNet was here? And yeah, just how well that's all just working out.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've seen tremendous uptick in users at the federal, state, local, tribal level. And so it's across the board. Department of Homeland Security, entities within Department of Justice, Department of Defense. You may have seen reports of AT&T FirstNet being deployed on military bases now. All of these agencies now, so long as they have that public safety function, they're able to be subscribers of FirstNet. And we've seen that. A number of agencies inside departments, from ATF, FEMA, inside Department of Defense, have become heavy users of FirstNet. And what's really exciting, what's really encouraging is, given the fact that this is a federal entity from an authority perspective, we're able to coordinate with other agencies and departments in ways that maybe we haven't been able to in the past. There are folks that have fish and wildlife, forestry services, all of these aspects when you think of how they're leveraging the network, but also they also have assets that potentially could be used to deploy FirstNet or to have assets hung on. So this is the unique characteristics of what we at FirstNet have. We're trying to develop as many partners as we possibly can. Just at CES a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how 2020 we're really looking to collaborate with as many folks as possible to ensure that the rapid deployment of the system, but also the use of the system. Because so long as it's in the hands of public safety, which is what we're only allowed to do, then we're able to provide safety and solutions for first responders and to protect those of us here in the room and across the United States. So federal use has been very good, can always get better, and same for all the other verticals I talked about, state, local, tribal, and others. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much. Please join me
Thanks,
in thanking Mr. Parkinson.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Hi, Ken.